Life is not always easy, and most people carry more than they let the world see. Sometimes, all we need is a good story to slow us down for a little while and remind us that kindness, courage, and hope still matter. So wherever you are, I hope this story keeps you company. And if you enjoy this kind of heartfelt science fiction, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. At Armitage Relay, the night shift never truly ended. The station turned slowly above Earth's outer military lanes, and the glass of the command gallery gave Commodore Sabrina Holt the same answer every time she looked into it. The stars were cold, the emergency lights were harsh, and she looked as tired as she felt. She had just come back from Perseid Gate. Officially, she was here to file losses, hand the wounded over to station care, and explain why 3 heavy Earth ships had not made it home. In reality, she was here to do something harder. She had to keep the people who survived visible long enough that no one could turn them into paperwork. Some of those survivors wore Earth gray. Many did not. Below the gallery, Dock Spine 4 was flooded with work lights and emergency beacons. Rescue skiffs came in one after another under station tractors, each bringing more stretchers, more cracked helmets, and more people too exhausted to keep calling one another enemies. Medical drones moved in white streams through the dock. Repair crews crawled over hull plates that still smelled of burned coolant and hot metal. Commander Jonas Reed stood half a step behind Sabrina, reading from a tablet without looking at her. He knew better than to interrupt when she went still like this. Updated count, he said. Confirmed alive across all recovery holds. 43,211. Earth personnel, 12,406. Foreign personnel, 30,805. They are still the largest group. Children? Sabrina asked. None recovered from the combat zone itself. A handful of civilian deck dependents from auxiliary carriers. Mostly adolescents. And the ships we lost? Jonas took half a breath before answering. Resolute Shield, Marrow Point, and Astorvale are gone. Escape pod from Astorvale are still being sorted. 200 more Earth personnel moved from critical to probable loss in the last hour. Sabrina kept her eyes on the dock. Tell Dr. Marr, I want Astorvale's list before command asks for it. They already asked. I know they did. He let that sit. Outside, one of the foreign rescue barges bumped lightly against the magnetic grid. For a moment, the hull camera on the main wall caught medics carrying out 2 VAIR officers on stretch frames, their blue-black uniform collars cut away, one hand of one officer still locked around the strap of an Earth rescuer's shoulder plate. The rescuer was young. He did not shake the hand loose. That was the part half the galaxy would not understand. The battle had ended 6 hours ago. The war around Perseid Gate had not. It had only changed shape. Perseid Gate was a military choke lane. Whoever controlled it controlled movement, fuel, and pressure across several border routes. Sabrina had held that gate. Then she had broken formation to save the people the other side had left behind. The first compact summary had already named her decision unlawful seizure of foreign strategic personnel under false rescue conditions. It was elegant, brief, and designed to spread. By now, it was across every military band worth watching. A junior liaison officer approached from the side corridor, moving too fast to pretend he was calm. Commodore Holt, he said, Station Command requests you in briefing ring 3. Immediate. Who is in the room? Rear Admiral Coates from Fleet Command, Civil Defense, Legal Affairs. 2 observers from Interstellar Conduct Review. Not just military, then. Sabrina nodded once. Jonas, with me. Forward Med Bay first. The liaison hesitated. Ma'am, they said immediate. Sabrina turned toward him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. And I said forward Med Bay first. If they want an officer who can recite numbers before she knows who is still breathing, they can find someone else. The liaison stepped aside. Before Sabrina faced command, she needed to see the people command was already trying to count. As they walked the upper spine toward the medical holds, Jonas said, You could let them wait 5 minutes and still win the argument. This is not about winning the argument. It is about telling them the station is not your only chain of command. That too. Thought so. They moved down a ramp where the air grew warmer and wetter, heavy with sterilizer and the metallic scent of blood that filtration could thin but never erase. Forward Med Bay had been built for 800 cases. It now held nearly 6,000. Temporary cots lined every open strip of deck. White privacy screens stood between species clusters where atmosphere and temperature had to be adjusted. Dr. Elena Marr looked as if she had aged 4 years since Sabrina had last seen her on the bridge. Her dark hair was tied back with a strip of torn supply wrap. Her left sleeve carried a stain she had clearly noticed and no longer cared about. "You came," Elena said. "You sound surprised." "I'm surprised. Fleet Command usually gets first claim on officers who lose 3 heavy ships and bring home a political disaster." Sabrina glanced over the med floor. "How bad?" Elena's expression flattened into the one she used when the answer was exact and ugly. "Better than they would have been if you had not opened the corridor. Worse than Station Command wants. We are short on coolant meds for Vare nerve shock, short on membrane packs for Halden, and short on sleep across all species, including mine. We also found something you need to hear before a lawyer tells you it matters less than paperwork." She led them through 2 rows of cots to an improvised diagnostic station where a damaged command module lay open on a tray. Its casing was marked with Vare Fleet insignia. Beside it sat 3 stripped wrist nodes and a cracked pilot slate. Elena tapped the module. These came off survivors from the Vare Auxiliary Cruiser, Sable Reach, and the Corin Carrier Deck 4. All 3 show identical command delays. Jonas frowned. "Battle interference?" "No," Elena said. "Not random enough. These systems were not just damaged. Their extraction channels were administratively locked." Sabrina's eyes narrowed. "Locked by whom?" "That is the part someone with authority will have to say out loud later. But whatever happened out there, many of those crews were not waiting for rescue that failed to arrive. They were waiting for rescue that was never meant to come." For a second, the med bay noise receded. Sabrina heard only the hum of the environmental fans and the thin buzz from a damaged privacy divider. Jonas looked from Elena to the tray. "You are sure?" "I'm tired," Elena said. "Not careless." Sabrina leaned closer. The display had frozen on a partial line of Vare script and routing tags. She did not read Vare well enough to parse all of it. She did not need to. The screen was full of denial loops. Locked, rerouted, deferred, reclassified. Not accident, then. Pattern. A movement at the edge of the bay drew her eye. On a nearby cot, one of the Vare survivors was awake and watching her. He had a broad, slate-colored face with faceted cheek ridges, one eye wrapped in medical mesh and the other painfully clear. An Earth translation collar rested against his throat. Elena saw where Sabrina was looking. Captain RHE Sailor. He was conscious for about 6 minutes earlier, angry enough to recover faster than expected. Sabrina walked over. The Vare captain's gaze tracked her uniform first, then the Commodore insignia, then the Earth flag patch at her shoulder. There was no gratitude there. Good, she thought. Gratitude would have made this easier and less honest. RHE's translator clicked on with a slight delay. "You are the one," it said. "I am Sabrina Holt. You should have left us." That too was honest. "Why?" she asked. "Because now they will say we are your prisoners." They were going to say many things. As good, I flicked toward the rows of cots. "How many? Alive?" "More than 40,000 across all holds." His jaw tightened. Whether from pain or emotion, Sabrina could not tell. "From my wing, we are still sorting manifests." "You opened your corridor for all of them?" "Yes." He studied her in silence. Then, with visible effort, he lifted one bandaged hand and tapped the collar at his throat. "No recall signal reached us. We remained in place. We thought the order tree had broken." Sabrina kept her face still. "Did it?" RHE closed his eye. "I do not know. That is worse." A nurse came over with an injector, and Elena stepped in before the exchange could go further. "Enough for now," she said softly. The man was a witness. The man was also half in shock. Sabrina nodded. "Keep him alive." Elena gave her a hard look. That was already the plan. On the way back up, Jonah stayed quiet until the lift doors closed around them. "If those locks hold," he said, then this is not just a rescue problem. No, it means someone in the compact triaged their own auxiliaries. It means someone decided who counted before the battle was even finished. And if we prove it, Sabrina watched the floor indicator climb. Then they will try even harder to make this about me. A few minutes later, she left a room full of stretchers and stepped into a room full of authority. The next fight was not about pulling people from fire. It was about what the system would call them after. Briefing Ring 3 was one of Armitage Relay's sealed war rooms, built in circles around a tactical table. Rear Admiral Naomi Coates stood at the far edge, hands clasped behind her back, face arranged into the kind of calm people used when they had been angry for too long. Two legal officers sat to one side. An exhausted civil defense minister sat to the other. At the back stood two observers from Interstellar Conduct Review. The wall display over them showed the public feed storm by region. Coates did not waste time. Commodore Holt stayed in one sentence why you broke holding formation at Perseid Gate. Sabrina stood across the table from her. Because 30,000 enemy auxiliaries and 18,000 of our own were dying in a debris kill zone, and a closed corridor would have left most of them there. One sentence. Efficient. Now state in one sentence the cost. 3 Earth-heavy ships destroyed while screening rescue lanes. Good. We agree on the facts. Jonas stiffened beside her. Sabrina did not move. Coates continued. What we do not agree on is whether you had the authority to decide that the moral image of Earth was worth compromising the defensive geometry of. Perseid Gate. Civil Defense Minister Arlo Den began. Admiral. With respect, Coates cut him off with a look. The minister may have respect. I currently have a fleet problem. Sabrina answered before the room could splinter. If Perseid Gate had fallen, you could try me for failure. It did not fall. We held the gate and recovered the living, and gave the compact exactly the narrative they need. The compact already had a narrative prepared, Sabrina said. They were faster than we were because they planned to need one. A legal officer folded his hands. That is speculation. No, Sabrina said. Speculation is guessing motive. I am stating sequence. One of the observers finally spoke. Are you alleging deliberate abandonment of foreign auxiliaries? Sabrina took one measured breath. I am saying I have preliminary evidence that many foreign crews at Perseid Gate were denied extraction routing. I am also saying that if you intend to bury this in language before we verify it, you should do it without my help. That landed. Not loudly, but enough. Coates' jaw set. You're not in a position to make demands. No, Sabrina said. I am in a position to tell you what happens if you move those survivors into off-site processing before their names are confirmed. The civil defense minister looked up. Which is? You lose them to procedure, Sabrina said. Their families lose them to procedure. And the first thing the galaxy will remember is that Earth carried them out of the fire and handed them to a machine. The room went quiet because everyone understood what was really being argued. Not just law. Control over the people still breathing downstairs. The display shifted as new public metrics came in. A cluster of family petition feeds from Vair and Corin territories had begun linking together under one shared demand. Where are people? Coates saw it too. Her voice changed by half a degree. Galactic Council has called for a preliminary public review within 48 hours. So soon. Not because Earth wanted it. Not because the compact wanted it. Because people with family inside those holds had reached one another faster than governments had learned how. To stop them. One legal officer cleared his throat. Given your direct involvement, Commodore Holt, you're the most likely witness of first instance. Witness, Sabrina thought. Not representative. Not yet. That distinction could still be weaponized. And if I refuse? She asked. You will not, Coates said. Sabrina met the Admiral's eyes. No, I will not. The public review would come after the battle, then, after the corridor, after the losses, after the choice and the price. Harder that way, but truer. Coates turned off the public metrics. For now, you remain at Armitage Relay. You will submit all combat logs, corridor routing orders, and rescue manifests. No independent statements to the press. No language that inflames the review. No grandstanding. Sabrina almost smiled. I have not slept in 31 hours, Admiral. Grandstanding would be difficult. Good, Coates said. Then spend the next 6 making sure your rescue does not become a legal catastrophe. Sabrina left the briefing ring with Jonas and Elena under escort light, polite enough not to be called escort. Outside, Doc's spine force still glowed below like a wound under glass. Rescue barges were still arriving. That steadied her. Whatever the room behind her wanted to argue, the work below was still simple. People were alive or not. Families would find them or lose them. Elena rubbed at her eyes. You know they are going to try to take this away from you. I know, Jonas asked. Do we still have time to sort the foreign manifests before the council review? Sabrina looked down at the med decks where Earth crews were carrying strangers through white light. Not enough, she said. So we make time. Far below them, another shuttle latched onto the dock. The camera feed expanded automatically. 2 Vair civilians had reached the outer gate with station permission. Family members, then. The first ones in person. The war had changed shape again. 2 hours later, the fight had moved from argument to names. In Hole 9, what mattered most was not blame yet. It was making sure the living could still be found. Sabrina stood on the intake floor with a stylus in one hand and a hard copy manifest board in the other because station networks were already buckling under traffic spikes from 3 sectors. She had changed out of her scorched bridge coat, but not out of command black. Hole 9 had once been a freight compartment. Now, it was a recovery hall divided into species zones by clear panels and environmental curtains. The Vair block ran cooler than Earth standard. The Halden row used denser atmosphere and lower sound. Behind glass booths, station volunteers tried to match faces to damaged service records while messages from families poured in faster than they could answer them. This, Sabrina thought, was how history really turned. Not in polished chambers. In rooms full of tired people trying to get names right before someone in authority found a way to make those names disappear. A young clerk from Civilian Liaison raised a hand. Commodore, we have 6 incoming requests from Vair family groups asking for direct verification. They say the council office gave them no timeline. Because the council office does not have one, Sabrina said. Route them through delayed audio only. No visuals until Elena clears each patient. Ma'am, some are refusing delayed audio. Then they can refuse. We are not using half-conscious survivors to satisfy public panic. The clerk swallowed and nodded. At the far end of the hold, Jonas was arguing with a military legal attaché from Fleet Command, a narrow-faced man named Bryce Hahn who looked as though regulations had been stitched directly into his bones. Hahn turned as Sabrina approached. He repeated the transfer demand in colder language. Sabrina refused in colder language still. If someone above her wanted 30,000 survivors moved into a neutral processing annex before their names were confirmed, that Superior could come sign the release orders in person. Hahn warned about optics. Sabrina answered with numbers. Lose 30,000 names to procedure 40 hours before their families demanded proof of life, and no legal phrase in the galaxy would survive the backlash. Sabrina leaned past him to the display pad in his hand. Show me the receiving authority. He hesitated. She took the pad anyway. The transfer destination was not a humanitarian corridor in any meaningful sense. It was a remote arbitration annex contracted through Interstellar Conduct Review, 2 jumps farther out from public civilian lanes and designed for exactly this kind of invisibility. The language on the order was bland. Temporary stabilizing relocation. Identity confirmation pending. Chain of care under review. You want me to bury them in paperwork, she said. Hanstiefenied. I want to reduce intergovernmental escalation by making sure no one can see them. That is not what I said. It is what the document does. She handed the pad back. Denied. He set his jaw. I can elevate this. Please do. Hahn walked off with the offended posture of a man certain procedure would avenge him later. Sabrina watched him go, then turned to Jonas. How many family requests now? Up to 12,000 and climbing. Mostly Vair. Some Corrin. A few Halden. We also have 27 requests from compact ministries trying to verify service status without family authorization. Deny ministries. Accept families. That will look political. Everything already looks political. Jonas did not argue. He scrolled to the next screen. There is more. Triage feeds are cutting together our rescue footage with combat losses from Resolute Shield. The message is that you spent Earth ships to extract enemy assets. Sabrina absorbed that without visible reaction. Who is carrying it hardest? High Marshal Tarek Voss himself. He is using the phrase image warfare. Elena Marr arrived before Sabrina could answer. The doctor held 2 data wafers between her fingers. I need secure analysis on both of these, Elena said. One from a Veyer tactical bracelet. One from a core and deck node. Both show countdown loops tied to command channels that never completed. Jonas reached for them. Elena pulled her hand back. Not to fleet command, she said. Jonas blinked. I was not going to dash. Yes, you were. You just would have called it proper routing. She looked at Sabrina. I need an independent scan team. Civilian cryptography, not military. Sabrina considered that for half a second. Lisa Quill is on station. Jonas looked up sharply. Ugh. Journalist. She has a civilian data forensics contact embedded in public records review. I met him during the Belen corridor hearings. Jonas stared. You met a journalist during a hearing and stayed in touch? No. I met a person who knew how systems hide things in plain sight. The journalist happened to be standing nearby. Elena gave her a thin smile. That is the closest thing to humor I have heard from you since before the battle. Sabrina turned. Fine, Quill. Lisa Quill arrived with her civilian records specialist, Oren Pell, a distracted man who treated command encryption like a personal insult. They set up in a sealed booth beside the hold while Sabrina kept intake moving. By the end of the first hour, 3 things had changed at once. First, family contact bands across compact space had linked themselves into a petition system too broad for any one ministry to mute. The feeds were emotional, angry, messy, and impossible to dismiss as one orchestrated campaign. Second, Tarek Voss escalated. He appeared on a tri-sector military channel in full formal insignia and declared that Earth had interfered with his sovereign recovery zone to harvest personnel for moral leverage against the compact. He never once used the word rescue. Third, Oren Pell found the first clean fracture in the story. He emerged from the booth rubbing both eyes. The Veyer command bracelet and the core and deck node were both rerouted through an upper-tier triage filter, he said. Not tactical noise. Administrative override. Meaning, Jonas asked, meaning someone upstream decided who got extraction priority and the dead were selected before they were dead. Elena folded her arms. Can you trace it? Not fully. The source is masked through a strategic relay tree. But the syntax is not battlefield syntax. It is cost governance syntax. That phrase landed like ice in Sabrina's stomach. Say it plain, she said. Oren looked almost embarrassed. It reads like accounting. No one spoke. Sabrina's mind went back to Perseid Gate, to the way the first foreign life pods had lit up on her tactical wall. They had not drifted randomly. They had been clustered in places that made no sense for her. Orderly withdrawal. How many layers between this and Marshal Voss? She asked. Oren gave a helpless tilt of the hand. Enough to deny. Not enough to feel clean. Lisa Quill, silent until then, looked from Oren to Sabrina and said the thing no officer in the room had wanted to say first. If this is true, the hearing will not be about whether you broke protocol. Sabrina met her eyes. No, it will be about whether the galaxy still recognizes the difference between triage and abandonment. By evening, Armitage Relay no longer felt like a station. It felt like the center of a storm. Rear Admiral Coates called Sabrina back to command and delivered the next blow with a face that remained admirably expressionless. Galactic Council has elevated the preliminary review, Coates said. Not a closed military consultation. A public hearing through civic chamber. Jonas swore quietly. Coates ignored it. Timing is 40 hours. You are the lead witness of direct action. Witness, Sabrina said. For now, meaning Earth had not yet decided whether to let her speak as Earth or only as the officer whose choices had become inconvenient. Coates saw the reading in her face. Do not make this harder than it already is. With respect, Admiral, I did not call the hearing. No, Families did. That is what makes it dangerous. Governments can contain one another. They cannot easily contain grief once it finds a language and a schedule. Sabrina thought of the people below them in Hold 9. Of the woman on delayed audio who had burst into tears when a medic held up her brother's ID plate for confirmation. Of RHE sailor turning his face away from an Earth camera because he would rather bleed than be seen needing human help. "What does Earth want from me?" she asked. Coates took longer to answer than usual. "Earth wants the gate held, our losses justified, our dignity intact, and our strategic alliances not shredded in a single week." That is not an answer. It is the only honest one. Sabrina almost respected that. Late that cycle, she returned to RHE Sailor. He described what his wing had expected in the final minutes at Perseid Gate. Rotation support, then fallback, then nothing. When she asked whether any local log had survived, he drew a sliver of dark composite from his bedding and handed it over. "A bridge clerk hid in my collar seam," he said. "I did not trust your medics." "Do you trust me?" "No," he said, "but I trust what your corridor means." That was enough. Back in the sealed analysis booth, Oren Pell nearly dropped the data sliver when he decrypted its index. The mirror log showed extraction windows opened for core compact war groups and closed for attached VAR auxiliaries 14 minutes before the final retreat signal. It showed service value waiting. It showed lives turned into columns. The room stayed quiet when Oren finished. Jonas spoke first. "If this goes public, the compact burns." "No," Sabrina said. "The people who wrote it burn. The compact will try to survive by calling them exceptional." Lisa Kuhl looked up from her notes. "And the council?" "The council will try to call it tragic complexity," Sabrina said. "Because if they call it what it is, they have to ask how many systems like there's already run on the same logic." Lisa nodded slowly. "Now we have the real hearing." Sabrina did not answer. She was thinking about a different problem. Proof was not enough. Not in a system that could rename proof, relabel people, and delay truth until outrage grew tired. They would need timing, names, witnesses, a line ordinary listeners could hold on to through one hearing. Below them, thousands of survivors tried to sleep under Earth lights while families across the galaxy waited for their names. Somewhere between those two realities, the next battle had already begun. Earth did not remove Sabrina Holt from command, but it tried everything around removal first. An official notice ordered her into internal review before transfer to Galaxy Council jurisdiction and froze all procedures above immediate medical necessity. Suspended, Sabrina thought, was a polite word for slowed until harmless. She signed receipt and went looking for Rear Admiral Coates. Coates was in the operations tower staring at a wall of traffic vectors that had nothing to do with Sabrina and everything to do with a border still one bad week away from. Fresh fire. That, more than anything else, reminded Sabrina not to turn the Admiral into a simple villain. "You are freezing release procedures," Sabrina said. Coates did not turn. "I am freezing unauthorized release procedures. Families already know some of their people are here. They know that because your station has become a leak wrapped in a hospital. It became that because reality arrived faster than policy." Coates looked at her then, tired enough for honesty. She was trying to keep Earth from being cast as a state that collected foreign fighters for leverage. Sabrina was trying to keep the living from disappearing into process. The difference between those goals was smaller than either woman liked, and sharper than either could ignore. Coates folded her arms. "You think that helps us?" "I think replacing me helps everyone who wants this to become abstract." For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Coates said, "The internal review is not removal." Yet, Coates admitted, the review board was smaller than the war room, and somehow more hostile for it. 3 officers, 1 civilian legal chair, 1 ethics observer from Earth Parliamentary Defense. The table was bare except for Sabrina's corridor orders, casualty reports, and a red mark packet containing projected strategic losses if Perseid Gate had been penetrated while her rescue lanes were open. Judge Advocate Miriam Soles spoke with precise calm. "Commodore Holt, this board is not convened to deny the value of human life." Sabrina sat straight. Boards rarely say that before they begin. The ethics observer hit a reaction. Sol did not. Then let me be more direct, Sol said. We are here to determine whether your deviation from battle formation was materially justified under command duty. It was. You opened a broad-spectrum rescue corridor while under unresolved threat. Yes. You prioritized foreign rescue signals alongside Earth assets. Yes. You did so knowing it could expose the gate. Yes. Sol stiplet her fingers. Why? Because they were alive, Sabrina thought. Because the screens had been full of people drifting in dark with no recall signal. Because someone had already made them cheap enough to leave behind. Out loud, she said, because command duty is not only to territory. It is also to what we become while we defend it. One fleet officer shifted impatiently. That is philosophy. No, Sabrina said. It is the point where command stops being defense and starts becoming excuse. If the only version of victory available to us required watching tens of thousands die when we had a way to reach them, then every speech we give about why Earth fights would become a costume. The other officer leaned forward. And if the gate had broken? It did not. You gambled that it would not. I calculated that screening rescue lanes with 3 heavy ships and a reduced attack profile gave us a survivable hold if the compact core had already committed its retreat window. Which it had. The room tightened. Strategy they could debate. Ethics they could compartmentalize. What none of them liked was that both arguments were true at the same time. Sol moved to the point beneath the point. We have been informed of preliminary evidence suggesting extraction denial among compact auxiliaries. That evidence is not yet independently certified. It will be, perhaps. Until then, this board cannot treat foreign abandonment as established fact. Sabrina looked at the packet in front of Sol. You do not need abandonment established fact to decide whether I was right to rescue the living. Sol held her gaze. No. But it matters very much to what happens next. That was the real pressure. Earth was already preparing not only for judgment on Sabrina's choice, but for a larger fight over the machinery behind the battle. When the review ended, Sabrina was not removed. She was also not protected. Outside the chamber, Jonas met her with bad coffee and worse news. The internal review was over, but the larger fight was only changing speakers. The legal pressure just changed shape, he said. Cell Karen has entered the field. Sabrina took the coffee. How bad? She's not attacking the rescue itself. She is reframing the people you rescued. He showed her the clip. Advocate Cell Karen stood before a line of microphones in the formal white and cobalt of Triage compact, legal service, elegant as a blade. We do not dispute, Karen said smoothly, that Earth vessels retrieved numerous displaced personnel during the Perseid Gate collapse. The issue is not sentiment. The issue is lawful control of strategic persons and systems after combat disruption. Strategic persons. Not wounded. Not survivors. Strategic persons. That, Sabrina said quietly, is the hearing line. Jonas nodded grimly. If she wins that language, everything else gets swallowed. That was why Sabrina spent the next 7 hours not in command chairs or legal rooms, but in recovery wards and intake booths. She needed witness texture, not theatrics, not tears for broadcast. Specificity. Dr. Elena Marr walked her through the Vare block where bodies had stabilized enough for longer interviews. You cannot use all of them, Elena said. Too many are fragile. I know. You also cannot use only the most articulate. It will look curated. I know. Elena gave her a sidelong look. I am saying that because you are most dangerous when you think feeling less will keep everyone safer. Sabrina almost objected, then did not. Elena was usually right in the ways that mattered. Captain RHE Sailor agreed to speak in a secure room the size of a maintenance office, with one station recorder, one translation caller, and Jonas present as witness. He looked better than before, but not enough to hide what he had come through. You understand, RHE said at the start, that if I testify publicly, I become unusable to my own command. Sabrina sat opposite him. You may already be. That is true. Then why do it? RHE took time answering. Because my sister has already sent 4 public petitions to your station under our family code. Because 13 people from my wing are alive in your hold, and 48 are not. Because if this is named combat confusion, then the dead lose even the truth of how they died. Sabrina let the silence hold after that. He described the final minutes before collapse. Auxiliary wings waiting for extraction updates. Core compact destroyers receiving route vectors first. Local requests bounced upward and returned with delay codes. A final directive instructing his unit to maintain screen position for 6 additional minutes beyond survivable range. Then nothing. No counterorder? Sabrina asked. None. No rerote. None. Did you believe at the time the command had lost capacity? Yes. And now? RHE's good, I hardened. Now I believe command had priorities. That line stayed with Sabrina. Later, in another ward, she met a Halden Signals officer who had watched 3 auxiliary squadrons go dark while core units withdrew in clean sequence. Then a core in-deck chief, whose emergency dock seals had stayed locked after a carrier was reclassified non-recoverable, while she and hundreds of others were still transmitting. Then an Earth rescuer from the lost ship Resolute Shield who had kept towing in foreign life pods after his own vessel took internal fire, because his captain's last order was keep pulling them in. These details mattered because they made the pattern harder to flatten. By the time the transport to Galaxy Council space lifted from Armitage Relay, Sabrina had built a dossier broad enough to survive attack and clean enough to survive one hearing. The journey took less than a day through sanctioned corridor lanes, but politically it crossed much more ground. Family petitions from compact space crossed alliance lines. Neutral commentators began using the phrase, the abandoned wings. Earth feeds split between praise and anger. Lisa Quill traveled on the same convoy under separate clearance. She found Sabrina alone once in the observation ring outside the diplomatic cabins, where the stars stretched straight under corridor acceleration. I'm not here as press, Lisa said. Then as what? As someone who has seen hearings eat facts before. Sabrina did not look at her. You have advice. I have an observation. If you go in a civic chamber trying to prove you are morally superior, you lose. That was not my plan. If you go in trying to prove the compact is monstrous, you also lose. Too easy for them to call it wartime strain. Then what do I prove? Lisa leaned against the rail. That the system already knows how to speak about lives without ever calling them lives. People fear monsters for a day. They fear procedures that sound normal for much longer. Sabrina turned to face her. Why help me? Lisa smiled faintly. Because I grew up on a freight station where my mother spent 9 years fighting a shipping board that kept calling an air filtration failure an acceptable transit event. Systems are most dangerous when they find the language that lets ordinary people look away. Not grand, then. Personal. That made it more trustworthy. What are you going to report? Sabrina asked. The truth, Lisa said. Or as much of it as survives legal review and my editor's fear. But this part is off the record. Karen will try to make you choose between law and humanity. Do not. Make them explain why they ever believe the two could be enemies. When Lisa left, Sabrina remained by the glass and thought of Earth. Earth was not innocent. No military power was. She had spent too many years in uniform to worship flags without reservation. But there was a reason she had not resigned after the Helix quarantine, after the grain escorts, after the endless border negotiations that turned hungry families into leverage. She stayed because every so often the structure bent around someone who still remembered the purpose underneath it. At council approach, diplomatic cutters escorted them into the civic array of the council world, a place built to make power feel inevitable. Sabrina disliked it on sight. Speaker Ilian Sortha's office sent a welcome packet before the transport had fully docked. Formal agenda. Seating assignments. Review limitations. Permitted evidentiary windows. Jonas scanned the packet beside her as they crossed the transfer bridge. They have scheduled Marshal Voss before you. Expected. Karen gets separate legal framing after him. Also expected. RHE Sailor is listed as conditional if medically stable. That means they hope he will not be. Jonas exhaled. This place gives me hives. It gives me architecture. That was almost a joke. Do not spread it around. Their quarters at the council complex were luxurious in the irritating way institutions became luxurious when they wanted submission to feel like hospitality. Sabrina ignored the view and went directly into preparation. The greatest danger was not lack of proof. It was excess. Civic Chamber could absorb mountains of truth and file them as complexity. Sabrina needed shape. Establish the corridor and the cost. Refuse the language strategic persons. Prove extraction denial was administrative. Show the pattern across species. Then force the chamber to face families before it could hide behind delay. Sleep did not come. She spent half the cycle seated at the desk in her quarters, boots finally off, reading casualty lines from the 3 Earth ships she had lost. Resolute Shield, Marrow Point, Aster Valley. The dead of her own side had to remain inside the story, not as decoration, but as price. A knock came at the door near dawn. It was not Jonas, not Elena. Rear Admiral Coates stood outside, travel coat still on, face set with the exhaustion of someone who had crossed 3 jurisdictions to say one thing in person. "You were not supposed to be here," Sabrina said. "I decided to irritate scheduling." Coates stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She looked once at the civic array below and said, "Earth has made its choice. You speak for yourself at the hearing. You also speak for us." Sabrina felt the weight of that settle. What changed? Coates turned. Family feeds from compact space started breaking through to domestic lines on Earth. Then the names from Resolute Shield started circulating alongside their petitions. Then a parliamentary block I usually avoid asked whether Fleet Command intended to hide behind a Commodore or stand beside one. Sabrina almost smiled. Public pressure. Do not enjoy it too much. You're still one bad answer away from making this unwinnable. Was it ever winnable? Not cleanly. Coates reached in her coat and placed a sealed token on the desk. That grants direct witness recall authority under Earth delegation. If Soreth tries to close the hearing before witness sequence finishes, you can challenge. At the door, Coates paused. Holt, yes. Do not go in there trying to make Earth look saintly. We are not. Go in there and make it impossible for them to call the living cargo. After she left, Sabrina held the authorization token for a long moment before setting it beside the casualty list from Resolute Shield. The next battle would not be fought at Perseid Gate, but it had begun there. In the moment a corridor opened between burning hulls and Earth ships started pulling in everyone they could reach. By the time Sabrina entered Civic Chamber, the argument was no longer only about what she had done. It was about what the galaxy wanted to pretend those people were. Civic Chamber was built to make even truthful people feel small. The ceiling rose in nested rings of light and dark stone. Translation lattices hung above the central floor. Seating tiers curved outward in precise arcs, each marked by alliance bands, observer blocks, and public review galleries beyond transparent acoustic shields. At the center stood the witness circle, where Commodore Sabrina Holt would spend the next several hours trying to keep 30,000 living people from being transformed into a legal category. Her dress uniform had been repaired, but not replaced. The cuff on the left sleeve still carried a near-invisible heat mark for Perseid Gate. She had chosen not to hide it. Speaker Ilian Soreth presided from the high central dais. High Marshal Tarek Voss sat below and to the right under compact military colors. Advocate Cell Karen occupied the legal station to the left, hands folded, patience turned into posture. The hearing opened with procedural language. Jurisdiction. Scope. Rescue authority. Public concern. Sabrina listened without moving. That was the trap. Let the chamber define the event before the event could define itself. Voss spoke first. He used no shouting and no easy contempt. He did not need either. At Perseid Gate, he said, compact and Earth forces suffered severe attrition in a degraded tactical environment. During lawful withdrawal operations, Commodore Sabrina Holt of Earth unilaterally expanded rescue lanes into contested recovery space, removing large numbers of foreign military personnel before recognized sovereign channels could be established. Not rescue then, removing. He turned slightly toward the public galleries. No one in this chamber is indifferent to suffering. The question before us is narrower. Whether one officer's personal doctrine may override conflict frameworks built to prevent greater escalation. Then he placed 3 Earthship emblems on the display. Resolute Shield, Marrow Point, Aster Valley. These vessels, Voss said, were lost under Holt's command during the unauthorized expansion. Earth paid for this act in blood. That loss deserves seriousness, not sentiment. For one instant, Sabrina hated him for using her dead so cleanly. Then she let the hatred go. Speaker Soreth inclined his head. Commodore Holt, you may respond. Sabrina stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to carry. I will respond to the loss first, she said. 3 Earth-heavy ships were destroyed screening the rescue corridor at Perseid Gate. I knew the risk when I gave the order. The dead from those ships are not symbols to me. They are officers and crew under my command. Their names are in my record, and I carried them into this chamber with me. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. She continued. Now the second fact. The corridor those ships screened pulled more than 40,000 living people out of a debris kill zone, including over 30,000 foreign auxiliaries who were still transmitting distress codes after core retreat lanes had already formed. Foreign military personnel, Karen corrected smoothly. Sabrina turned toward her. People first, military after. They were dying in that order. A murmur ran through the public bands and was cut off by chamber dampening. Soreth raised a hand. Commodore, the chamber recognizes your phrasing. Continue with procedural discipline. Of course, Sabrina said. That was the first turn. Small, but enough. Voss attacked again. Did you, or did you not, know that broad extraction risked exposing Perseid Gate? I knew the risk. And you proceeded? Yes. Why? Because my tactical wall showed tens of thousands alive in open drift without viable recall channels, and because closing the corridor would have meant Earth chose to watch them die while possessing the means to act. You assumed authority over lives not under Earth command. I accepted responsibility where command had failed them. That drew a sharper stir. You assert failure, Voss said. On what basis? Sabrina looked to the chamber recorder. On the basis that core withdrawal occurred while multiple auxiliary blocks remained locked out of extraction routing. On the basis that those blocks continued transmitting distress and identity codes far past any plausible battle confusion window. On the basis that survivors recovered by Earth across 3 species report waiting for recall that did not arrive. Karen entered before Voss could answer. Recovered by Earth and interviewed in Earth custody. Yes, Sabrina said. So every statement you cite passed through your chain. Through medical stabilization. Not coercive custody. Karen tilted her head. A distinction the chamber cannot simply accept because you prefer it. No, Sabrina said, which is why I brought records. She signaled Jonas. The first data sequence went live overhead, stripped of jargon and timed for comprehension. Rescue field map. Core compact retreat lanes. Auxiliary distress clusters. Extraction windows. Sabrina did not overwhelm the room. She guided it. This ring is Perseid Gate at the collapse point. These are Earth hold lines. These are compact core withdrawal vectors. These red clusters are surviving auxiliary groups. Vayer, Corin, Halden. None received completed extraction routing before the kill zone destabilized. Karen rose. Objection. That conclusion presumes command failure. Sabrina shook her head. No, it presumes command sequence. The evidence for failure or intent comes next. Speaker Soreth allowed it. The chamber heard Dr. Elena Marr first. Elena was tired, precise, and unimpressed by pageantry. These patients arrived with command locks still active in their recovery systems, she said. Not random damage. Administrative delay loops. We found them on Vayer tactical bracelets, core and deck nodes, and auxiliary control bands. The pattern is consistent across species and equipment trees. Karen tried to soften her. Doctor, you are a physician, not a fleet signal analyst. Elena answered, that is correct. I'm also a physician who knows. What standard emergency extraction protocols look like when they're absent from the bodies in front of me. A small wave of restrained laughter crossed the observer tiers. Then came the local mirror logs through Oren Pell's civilian forensic chain. That mattered. Not captured code processed by Earth war systems. Medical recovery artifacts, archived and verified through civilian methodology. The display shifted from tactical mapping to command syntax. Sabrina kept her explanation short. These entries do not show random system collapse, she said. They show differential extraction priority. Core lines receive routing. Attached auxiliaries receive delay, deferral, or reclassification. Voss's jaw hardened for the first time. Karen stood again. Reclassification in combat is not proof of malicious abandonment. In collapsing engagements, command triage may preserve continuity and prevent wider loss. There it was. Not denial. Justification. Sabrina looked at her directly. Say that again for the families in the public galleries. Soreth intervened at once. Commodore. But the damage had already been done. Karen had given the chamber the cleaner vocabulary it wanted. Sabrina pressed while the line was still open. What Advocate Karen calls continuity, she said, meant real crews remained in open drift after core units withdrew. It meant some lives were treated as acceptable loss before they were actually lost. If the chamber wishes to call that triage, it may. But it should do so while looking at the people who survived it. That was when she used Earth's Recall Authority token. Speaker, Sabrina said, I invoke direct witness recall and request immediate testimony from Captain R.H.E. Sailor of the Vare Auxiliary Wing. The chamber lights shifted. Soreth clearly disliked the timing. R.H.E. entered under medical clearance, wearing neutral recovery gray instead of Vare service colors. He looked less like a soldier than like what he had become in this story, someone a system had tried to reduce and had failed to erase. His testimony was spare. Yes, his wing expected extraction. Yes, they remained in position under orders. Yes, they received no completed recall. Yes, they watched core compact units withdraw on cleaner vectors. Yes, they believed command capacity had broken. No, he no longer believed that. What do you believe now? Soreth asked. R.H.E.'s translator held the chamber in a steady metallic voice. I believe we were weighted, not abandoned. Weighted. For the first time, the public galleries made noise loud enough for chamber suppressors to work. Soreth called for order. Voss asked for caution against emotional contamination. Karen objected to species-specific interpretation of command intent. Sabrina waited until the room thinned back toward silence. Then she laid the second, harder turn on the table. Speaker, she said, the chamber is attempting to decide what to call these survivors while most of their families still do not know where they are. I request authorization for immediate identity confirmation and family relay from the Auxiliary Civic Hall. Soreth's expression chilled. That is outside current scope. No, Sabrina said. It is the reason current scope matters. Voss rose. This is theater. Sabrina turned toward him. No, Marçal. Theater is calling people strategic persons after leaving them to die. The chamber broke again, harder this time. Soreth struck the silence chime and held it longer than necessary. Commodore Holt, this chamber will not be commandeered by moral spectacle. Sabrina answered without heat. Then do not let it become one. Let the living be identified now. For 3 seconds, no one moved. That was the center of the hearing. Not evidence. Not accusation. A choice about whether the chamber would preserve dignity by action or preserve itself by delay. Soreth looked down at his desk console, taking in updates no one else could see. When he spoke, the words were clipped. Auxiliary Civic Hall will be open for limited identity confirmation under chamber supervision. No unverified manifest release. It was not everything. It was enough. The hearing did not end there. It broke open. What had been argument in the chamber turned, a few doors away, into families seeing the living with their own eyes. The Auxiliary Civic Hall had been built for receptions and treaty signings. Within 20 minutes, it became a return station. Portable screens rose where sponsor banners had stood. Translation pillars were dragged into new lines. Medical verification desks linked directly to chamber oversight. Sabrina stood at the first verification table in full view of the relay cameras. She had argued to put civil staff out front and keep military presence minimal. Soreth had argued the opposite. They compromised on mixed teams, which meant the Galaxy watched Earth officers and council clerks together call names some governments had preferred to keep uncertain. The first confirmed return was a Halden engineer whose daughter appeared on a screen 3 meters tall and went rigid before either of them spoke. The second was a Vare ordnance tech whose mother refused to believe the image until he lifted the scarred left hand she had described in 3 petition filings. The third was a Corps and deck chief who stared at her brother for 10 full seconds before saying, very quietly, "They told you I was vapor." With each confirmation, the language shifted. Strategic persons died. People came home. Inside civic chamber, formal review continued impulses. Outside it, truth was being made visible one family at a time. Voss tried one final counterattack through the legal channel. He argued that ad hoc return procedures under live pressure contaminated testimony and collapsed distinctions between humanitarian duty and political exploitation. The argument might have worked earlier. It failed now because every minute produced another face on another screen, another family seeing someone they had already been trained to mourn. Karen shifted more elegantly. If the compact could not deny the people, it could still deny the pattern. She recast the deaths as wartime triage under unbearable pressure. Terrible, yes. Criminal, not established. Deliberate, not proven. That was her strongest ground. Not innocence. Ambiguity. Sabrina knew at the moment she heard the phrasing through the chamber relay in her ear. She stayed at the table long enough to steady one more family, then left the civic hall because the argument next door was about to decide what those reunions would mean. She left the verification desk only when Jonas touched her sleeve and said, "It is time." Back in civic chamber, the energy had changed. The civic hall next door had punctured the sealed atmosphere. Grief, relief, anger, and recognition were leaking through every formal seam. Speaker Soreth called the room to order and announced that additional evidence packages had been cross-confirmed through family service records, medical intake timing, and relay chain analysis. The chamber would therefore expand scope to include review of command allocation and extraction weighting within the Triage compact auxiliary structure. Voss stood immediately. "Speaker, expansion at this stage constitutes political capitulation to public agitation." "No," Soreth said, voice flat as polished stone. "It constitutes response to corroborated material." That was as close as the speaker would come to admitting the chamber had been forced. Sabrina was given final response time before adjournment. She had prepared 3 possible endings during the night before the hearing. All of them were wrong now. So she looked at the chamber, then at the public galleries beyond it, and chose clarity over design. At Perseid Gate, she said, "My fleet held a military corridor for Earth. That was our assignment. We also found tens of thousands alive in open drift after core withdrawal. Some wore Earth colors. Most did not. We pulled them in because they were alive, because we had the reach to do it, and because no command worth keeping should ask its people to forget the difference between an enemy in battle and a person dying after it." She let the translation lag finish. The hearing began with a question about whether I exceeded my authority. That question matters, but it is no longer the largest one in this room. The larger question is whether a system can classify some of its own auxiliaries as survivable losses in practice, while continuing to speak the language of order, law, and shared civilization. No flitisch, no raised voice. Earth lost ships at Perseid Gate. Families on Earth are grieving because of my decision and because of the battle that made that decision. Necessary. I will answer for that cost. But cost does not excuse blindness. Not ours. Not yours. She looked toward the public gallery screens, though no single family could meet her gaze from them all. The people in the civic hall next door are not battlefield leftovers to be argued over. They're not displaced assets. They're the living remainder of a choice someone higher in command made about who counted first and who counted last. Voss tried to interrupt. Soreth stopped him. Sabrina felt the room narrow around one final point. "When we cross back from Perseid Gate," she said, some voices called the survivors on our ships trophies. Some called them leverage. Some called them evidence. Earth does not need trophies from the dead and the half-dead. We do not build leverage out of people left gasping in broken pods. Her voice stayed level. Earth does not bring trophies home. Earth brings people home. Nothing moved. Not because the line was ornate. Because it stripped the chamber of its safest vocabulary. Then the room changed. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But enough. Observer blocks that had held back began entering formal support for expanded inquiry. Public channels surged so fast that even the chamber's delayed relay could not contain the momentum. Sorath, who had spent the hearing trying to preserve institutional shape, did the only thing left that still looked like control. He issued directives. Immediate continuation of Civic Hall verification under Council oversight. Preservation order on all compact extraction records from Perseid Gate. Provisional suspension of weighting-based casualty classification in pending auxiliary reviews. Formal investigative panel into command prioritization within Triage compact retreat doctrine. It was not revolution. It was procedure forced to move in a more human direction. After the ruling, Sabrina returned to the Civic Hall because that was where the consequences lived. The hearing had changed the language. The hall was changing lives. She stood beside medics and clerks and called more names. Some reunions were quiet. Some were angry. Some were too stunned to become anything at all for several minutes. One Earth. Sailor from a lost ship Marrow Point found the sister of a Veyer gunner he had dragged into a shuttle and stood awkwardly while she thanked him through tears he clearly wished were happening to someone else. That image stayed with Sabrina more than the applause did. Because there was applause, eventually, from one upper gallery band as she crossed back through the Civic Hall. It embarrassed her. It should have embarrassed the chamber more. Near midnight, when the first wave of confirmations had finished, Sabrina stepped alone onto the outer terrace above the hall. The council city below was all geometry and calm light, pretending institutions moved by reason alone. Jonas found her there a few minutes later. "You did it," he said. Sabrina looked out over the city. "No, we forced the first door. Same difference. It never is." He stood beside her without speaking for a while. Then he said, "Fleet Command just confirmed something else." Border chatter across 3 lanes dropped after the ruling. Some compact auxiliaries are refusing forward deployment until extraction rules are reviewed. Sabrina almost smiled. "There is your strategic outcome. Would you like me to tell Admiral Coates you said that?" "No, I would like to remain alive." He laughed once, tired and real. When he left, Sabrina stayed where she was. She thought of Perseid Gate, of burning hulls and rotating debris, of RHE Sailor saying we were weighted, of Earth crews on doomed ships still towing in foreign pods because the order had been to keep pulling them in, of the families who would sleep now with harder truths than before and more mercy than they had yesterday. The galaxy had not been transformed. Powerful systems did not change because one hearing shamed them. They changed when shame made denial expensive, when witnesses stayed alive long enough to remain inconvenient, and when the people hidden behind procedure were seen clearly enough that they could not be pushed back into shadow without cost. That was enough for now. Below her, the Civic Hall doors opened and closed as another family was let out under soft escort light. Somewhere beyond the terrace, in temporary quarters guarded by council law and public scrutiny, thousands of returned survivors were breathing the first safe air they had trusted in days. Sabrina Holt rested both hands on the stone rail and let the night move around her. Earth had not come to this world to look noble. Earth had come because a corridor had opened in fire, and once it opened, there had been only one decent thing to do. Whatever the galaxy called that later, the living knew better. For one long, hard day, that was enough. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the ruling, not the chamber, not even the words that finally broke through. The real victory was simpler than that. When the fire closed in and the system began turning lives into numbers, someone still chose to reach back. Someone still chose to say that the living were not cargo, not leverage, not a category to be managed. They were people, and sometimes, in a galaxy built on power, distance, and procedure, That choice is the one thing that still keeps the dark from winning. If this story stayed with you, if it meant something to you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about humanity, courage, and the moments that define who we really are. Until next time, thank you for listening.